Okay, hello and welcome to the second of our Unison Northern online series, Green Jobs, Secure Futures, in which we will explore what needs to be done to tackle the climate crisis, what that work looks like in terms of jobs for the North, and how we go about creating and transitioning to those jobs. We'll be looking to answer those questions through a series of 5 virtual events, and tonight is the second, and the theme is Secure Jobs, Housing and Transport. I'm Rona Craddock and I'm a regional organiser with Unison Northern, and I'll be hosting tonight's event. I'm joined by 4 really brilliant speakers who I'll introduce in turn. We'll hear from each of our 4 speakers and then there will be an opportunity for questions. So please do feed in your questions as we go along in the comments section of this video on Facebook, and I'll pick them up at the end. So our first speaker of the night is Professor Harriet Bulkeley of Durham University. And Harriet, I understand in your work on kind of urban sustainability, you've focused a lot on questions around energy, smart grids, infrastructure, housing, topics like that. So really relevant to tonight's conversation, and a lot to do as well with the kind of politics and governance side of environmental issues, and particularly the role of cities and non-state actors in responding to this kind of, well, this very global challenge. So Harriet, firstly, thank you for being here, and I hope this isn't too kind of big and too broad of a question to start with, but I wonder if you can kick things off tonight by giving us an overview of the work that needs to be done here in the Northeast to tackle climate change, to help us kind of visualise that, and also potentially touch, if you can, on what that means for job creation. So over to you, Harriet.
Thanks very much for having me tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on this. I've got a few slides, so I'm going to share my screen now so that we can share those together. Always takes a little while to get this thing up and running, but hopefully working for you now. Hopefully you can see that now. So yes, thanks again for having me with you tonight. What I want to just do in the sort of 10 minutes that I have is sort of paint a bit of a picture of where we are in the Northeast in terms of this idea of trying to get to net zero emissions. And first of all, what does net zero mean and why does it matter? Where's the Northeast compared to the rest of the UK? And then to look at some of the kind of key sectors where change is going to have to happen if we're going to want to get to that kind of goal, and to think a little bit about what that means for a kind of secure future, but also for, if you like, for understanding what it might mean to live a kind of good life in a low carbon world. We often think about a transition to a low carbon world as something that's going to be painful in one way or another, and perhaps there are difficulties and challenges we need to face, but it's also about thinking and imagining what a kind of good life might be as well. So hopefully that will be cheerful on a slightly damp September evening. So, I mean, most of you probably heard this phrase net zero. It gets bandied around a lot at the moment. And I think this diagram really helps me kind of understand what it means. Is that, you know, on the one hand, we're producing so many greenhouse gas emissions from all of the cars, our heating, our energy that we use at home and so on. And at the moment, that's out of balance with the natural world. And that's what's, of course, leading to climate change. So the idea of a net zero target is that it falls below what the threshold is that the world can absorb. And we can do that both by reducing our emissions, but also increasing the threshold by increasing the number of sinks that there are for carbon dioxide out there in the world. So we also need to think, when we talk about net zero, we can think also about landscape changes and ways in which we might work with nature also to support our ambitions for net zero, as well as reducing emissions directly. And of course, it's important because getting to net zero is going to be critical if we want to try and keep the planet within a safe limit, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has suggested will be a warming of 1.5 degrees. And this chart on the other side is just a few sort of facts and figures about what the difference is between living with 1.5 degrees and living with 2 degrees. Of course, it still means climate is changing, and we will still have the impacts of climate change to deal with. But the idea is that we should be able to be within safer limits where, you know, all of society can thrive. And in a sense, that's the key thing for security and jobs in the future, isn't it? That if we can't thrive as a society together, that security and those jobs are going to be under threat anyway. So, I mean, this might be a kind of slide that surprises a few people actually, because when you look at the whole UK picture, what you can see is, for not altogether positive reasons, the Northeast has decarbonised much more than other regions of the UK. So in a sense, the path to net zero is much more advanced in the Northeast of England than it is elsewhere. So overall, between 2005 and 2018, the UK as a whole has reduced its emissions by 35%, but the Northeast by 55%. And this will come into play when I talk later on about what does this mean about who should be doing what and where. This idea of a just transition, some people call it, about who's got the most responsibility for taking action and where should that be taking place. It's not to say that we still haven't got somewhere to go, of course we have. But again, if you look at these figures, and there's too many figures on the screen, but just to draw your attention to this, when again, when we look at what's the contribution of the Northeast to the UK's emissions, it's relatively limited and more progress is being made. But then when we start to look at it per capita, so per person, then we can see the picture change a bit really, and the Northeast becomes relatively similar to other regions of the UK. It's got higher industrial emissions per person, higher domestic and higher transport emissions. But why we come out on top or nearer the top overall is because we have more landscapes that are absorbing carbon dioxide than other regions of the country. And so this tells us something about how much we've got to value those landscapes and work at a landscape scale, as well as with infrastructure and energy in those systems as well, right? So the Northeast can do quite a lot here, and we'll talk about what some of those things might be in a practical sense now. So first of all, of course, looking at those figures, it tells you that the industrial commercial emissions in the Northeast are relatively high per person compared to the rest of the UK. We have a higher proportion of our economy tied into these industries. And this is going to be a really significant challenge. I'm actually working on a European project at the moment, which is called Reinvent Decarbonisation. And we've been looking at how can we tackle the challenge of decarbonisation in some energy intensive and therefore carbon intensive sectors of the economy. So plastic manufacture, paper, the steel industry. And in those kinds of industries, really energy efficiency measures and product efficiency measures can only really get you so far. What you really need is a change in the energy system that supports those industries. So you need renewable electricity, or you need hydrogen powered steel, or you need to start to move towards a circular economy where you start to reuse materials and stop producing so many virgin materials. That's a really significant challenge for us here in the Northeast, I think. But what we are seeing, which is really quite encouraging, is a lot of the largest companies in these sectors starting to pledge that they themselves are going to become net zero. So this is just a picture taken from a press release from the largest steelmaker in Europe, who've suggested this summer that by 2050 that they will be net zero. So here I think the key thing to be doing is to be working in partnership with these key industries to help transition to net zero, right? To think, if these companies are making these kinds of declarations, then how can we sort of work with them and support them? And here I think there's a really key role for the public sector and also for organizations like mine and the university to be really creating the demand for low carbon products, right? So why will these industries move towards low carbon is if there's a demand there for it. And there's many of us with our pension funds, the institutions, our procurement policies that we can start to really try to shift the demand as well. I think this is probably the hardest nut to crack. So from here on, it gets a bit more cheerful and a bit easier. The second key sector, of course, is transport. And we've all heard, how fast the electric vehicle market is shifting. And that's really exciting. I think it's really, really interesting. That, even 5 years ago, we really wouldn't have thought that there would be this sort of shift to the electric vehicle industry. There are still, of course, some challenges with electric vehicles. They still contribute to other challenges that we have. They take up a lot of space. They lead to congestion. There's some evidence of some pollution there. So sort of just a switch, taking our cars and just changing them to electric is going to be part of the answer. But we've also got to be a bit more imaginative. What you're seeing now is a really strong rise in all sorts of different electric vehicles. I was particularly taken with this one at the bottom here, with this very sort of cool graffiti behind it. Apparently this folds up into an A4 size and you can fit it in your backpack. So I haven't seen it in practice, but I would really, really like to. But what this tells me here is there's a huge amount of innovation possible in electric vehicles outside of just thinking about electric cars. And many, many people are finding that electric vehicles really of this kind, this sort of scooter, and small bike kind, really fit well with using public transport. So that people use electric vehicles to extend the range of public transport. So we don't have to think about building more and more trams or trains, but instead we think about the compatibility with different kinds of electric vehicles that can fold up and take on the train with you, right? I think there's some really interesting and exciting possibilities here. But of course, at the same time, some of the best ways of getting around cities that are low carbon we know about already. And there's just plain old walking and cycling and making space for people on our streets, right? And we've seen a lot of that during the lockdown, that people have, councils and other organizations have been able to put aside space for these different kinds of modes of mobility. And they're going to be really critical that we try to make sure that as we're planning cities of the future, that we keep space aside for these low carbon and enjoyable forms of getting ourselves around cities. Then we can come on to homes. And here I think, what net zero means is something that, knowing some of the other speakers on the panel, these are things that, have been on the cards for a really long time. It's not much rocket science that goes into making our homes affordable and warm for heat, to make them some places that we can enjoy being in. A lot of it here, I've said, is very much known and boring, right? So it's insulation, it's draft proofing, but it's kind of difficult to do because nobody really, on the one hand, nobody really makes savings from it financially quickly, and it's kind of tedious to do it, but it's so important, and we still haven't really cracked this nut. I think home energy improvements have been really good in the Northeast, but there's still quite a long way to go. We can also change to new forms of energy at home. Electricity is going to be, going much more renewable, and solar PV is taking off as a viable product for many people. And of course, smart grids that help us to use electricity, efficiently in the right times when there's surplus renewable electricity on the grid are also going to be important. But what I think net zero also does to us is it challenges us to go a bit beyond those obvious things about our energy consumption at home and ask other questions about other kinds of consumption that we have at home. The Committee on Climate Change, for example, the UK's advisory group that tells the government really where they are and what they need to be doing at a national level, has suggested that we really need to think about our diets if we're going to get to net zero. So this, I think, is a really, again, a critical area that we can think about, shorter chains of production, but also kind of coming up with a more mixed diet that's less reliant on high carbon eating like meat and dairy. But then I'll come on to the last area, which is about how we work with land and nature in the region as well. And here I think it's possibly a whole set of kind of untapped forms of security and employment that we haven't really been considering so much today in terms of getting to net zero. So you'll see a picture here of moorland that's been restored so that the peat is able to absorb carbon efficiently. And this is the sort of inaugural opening of a moorland, if you can have a kind of opening of a moorland, celebrating the restoration of this landscape so that it can properly function to absorb carbon for us. And the other picture is it's actually a picture taken in Melbourne, and let's hope we're not going to get as hot as it does in Melbourne on a very hot summer day here in the Northeast. But what it shows you is that how important street trees are for cooling the city. And one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment is looking how we can work with nature in cities to provide cooling and insulation through green roofs, green walls, and just more general tree planting in cities, and how that can help us address the impacts of climate change, like reducing flooding and heat waves, but can also start to provide a means by producing cooler buildings. It can start to reduce our reliance on energy as well. So there's lots of different forms then of work here, I think, that we really haven't kind of got to grips with, that could also kind of support our transition to net zero. These are kind of jobs which I think are less in focus, and they're not just, it's not, these might look like quite low tech jobs, but it actually takes a lot of science and a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise to be able to manage natural systems effectively to support a net zero transition. So just to finish with, I think, just in terms of a few sort of thoughts about what it will take politically, there's no doubt in my mind that any kind of transition has got to be one that takes questions of social justice into account. You can't have a transition without social justice. It won't work, and it won't be effective. And that means we need to really carefully think about how the costs and benefits of a low carbon transition will be distributed and who's going to win from that. But for me, a just transition also means that those who've got the most responsibility, capacity and resources to act have to be asked to act. And so that's some of our large scale institutions, such as a university that I'm based at. It's also about our large scale, commercial and industrial enterprises playing their role. And it's also about recognizing that contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is very much related to income. And so those parts of our community that are in the higher socioeconomic brackets, they do bear more responsibility for climate change than others do. And we need to think about how to take that question forward with us. And doing so, I think, also requires that we think about this idea of what a good life looks like in a low carbon world. And with some of my colleagues in Sweden, this is a colleague based in Sweden, we've just written a rough guide, like the old fashioned travel books, to a low carbon city in the future, to try to kind of entertain people a bit, get their imagination running, think about, what it would be like to visit, in this case, not what Nottingham will be like in 2045, the things that will have worked, the things that will have gone wrong, but just generally to try to get people to kind of imagine what it is that they want from a future low carbon life in a way that's not all about you just going to have to do without, and that actually this is a form of life that can be secure, that can be productive, and that can offer hopeful futures of various different kinds. So I hope that's been a good way to get our discussion started. Thanks again for having me, and look forward to the rest of the presentations.
No, thank you so much, Harriet. I think that's a really, really helpful and interesting introduction. And I think it's right, you set out at the beginning like that challenge ahead. I think it's important that we're realistic about that, but also that we don't, forget to remind ourselves about the progress and about that positives or the potential positives that can come with tackling climate change if we do it, I suppose, in the right way. And yeah, I suppose really important that we just keep talking about these topics, as daunting as they might be, and remind ourselves that it's not necessarily all or nothing straight away, and that transition's really important, and how we go about that, and kind of reminding ourselves of the different responsibilities and that kind of economic spread and things. So thank you very much, and I'm confident that our next speaker will be able to kind of enlighten us more on those topics, and in terms of understanding the work that's practically being done on the ground, kind of day in, day out, from a local authority perspective to tackle climate change. So Maggie, thank you so much for being with us today, and I think your title it's Low Carbon Economic Development Manager at Durham County Council, and you play a really key role in implementing some of that kind of work that probably relevant to what Harriet's been talking about. And have an idea of where we are in that journey that Harriet's kind of articulated. I wonder if you can tell us a bit about kind of the work that your team's doing to reach net zero, particularly on the kind of topics we're talking about today, those, our homes, transport, and what that means for jobs.
Yes. Hi everybody, thank you for inviting me, and thank you Harriet, brilliant as always. She always is. So yes, I work at Durham County Council. I've been there more years than I care to mention, and I've got a wonderful team of experts. I lean on them. I know nothing. I rely on them to tell me everything, but they're absolutely great. So going back, and again, I'll be repeating some of what Harriet said, but I think it's because we're all telling the same story here, so I think that's okay. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, thousands of scientists from around the world, the real experts, they told us late in 2018 that this is now a real crisis, and we have to reduce our carbon so much that we can reduce it to 1.5 degrees, as Harriet said, by 2030. So 2030 becomes this real turning point. If we don't achieve that, we're doomed, basically. We're hurtling towards really catastrophic climate change. That was in 2018. We had 12 years. We're now in 2020. We're nearly in 2021. That's 9 years left. And it's really scary when you work in this field to see the time flying past. For anybody that doesn't really believe it, and I know there are people who still, even now, say, well, climate change, I'm not convinced. If you look at the fires, the horrendous fires in Australia at the turn of the year, and now we've got the same horrendous fires happening in California. These don't happen every year. These are unique. These are dreadful. We've got the Arctic melting and fires actually in the Arctic. I mean, how can that be happening? We've got floods here. We've got storms everywhere. I'm not going to be gloom and doom, but I don't think there's any question. This is real. The emergency is real, and the urgency is real. So I'm really proud to be in a council that did declare a climate emergency. We were one of the early ones. The very first were Bristol, and they declared in autumn, I think October 2018. We declared a climate emergency in February 2019, driven in part by our wonderful Councillor John Clare. Clare Penny Evans, I don't know if you know John Clare, but if not, you need to, because he has the same role that you do as the climate change portfolio holder in the cabinet. And these are people who can make so much happen with a good person like that driving things forward. It makes a difference. And we were lucky in Durham. We had and we have a real commitment to tackling climate change. One of the things they've done, the senior people, is to actually consult all staff. And everybody's got their own views and their own knowledge and their own ideas. And when you actually ask people, it's a fantastic result. Doing all of that and doing a public consultation as well, we produced a plan which was published in February this year. Now, that's both good and bad. It's a brilliant plan, but that was a year after we'd declared. So that's 18 months after we had 12 years to go. And when you begin to think about timescales, it does become very scary. But I think our plan's excellent. I didn't write it, of course. My team wrote it because, as I said, they know far more than I do. But there are 111 separate projects or initiatives that we're working on. And each one says how much carbon it will save, how much money it will cost, how long it will take to implement, who's leading on it. And they're both plans for the council to work on our own buildings, our own land, our own transport, our own activities. And then partnership projects across the county, which obviously we can't always be responsible for those, but we try and help them to happen and support others. So that's been a really strong journey, developing the plan. And now we intend to review it to publish a sort of, I think they call it a refresh, it's one of those jargon words, in February next year, 2021. So that'll be 2 years after we declared. 2 and a bit years after we realised we only had 12 years to go. You see where I'm going with this. In the meantime, of course, we had COVID, and that was pretty much a shock for all of us. Massive impacts. Positive in the short term, big reduction in carbon emissions in the short term. We don't really know yet what the long-term impacts are because, of course, as we all know, it's changed how people work. So I'm sitting here in my front room and all of you are sitting there in your kitchens or front rooms or bedrooms or wherever we are. So we're not travelling to work and we're saving those carbon emissions. But we've got our heating on all day at home, especially in the winter. And the offices are probably being heated as well because there's a few people in there. So what's the net impact? We don't really know. But one net impact we do know is that there's going to be an economic crisis to follow and there's going to be a lot less money. We've also got the impacts of Brexit, which again, a lot of the money for what we do has come from Europe. And add all of that together, it feels like we have a very, very difficult time ahead of us and 9 years left to save the planet. And I've certainly found that progress has slowed during COVID with all of us working from home. You can't get people to go out and do stuff on site, maybe more now, but you couldn't at first. So big slowdown as well. So how do we protect and create good quality jobs in the light of all this? The need to transition from petrol and coal and gas and oil, we can't keep using those. The COVID, the new ways of working, running out of money, how do we turn all of that into good quality jobs and a good quality future? I'm not going to bore you and talk about our plans. If anybody's interested, we can share them with you, and I'd be delighted to. But in broad chunks, and again, very much following what Harriet was saying, really, I think there are a lot of jobs in all of this, and a lot of the jobs are where there is the most carbon to save. So I think that's a positive. All our buildings, whether they're homes or schools or town halls or leisure centres or hospitals or universities or colleges, they all need to be as near to zero carbon as they can. And if you live in an old bucket like this house here, full of asbestos and damp, and in fact, it's mostly damp actually, you can probably see it running down the walls behind me. How do we make something like this zero carbon? Real challenges. And that is going to need skills, it's going to need retraining, reskilling. You probably know 13% of households in the Northeast, that's 146,000 households, are in fuel poverty. It means that 10% of their income after they've paid the taxes and so on actually goes on heating and lighting their homes. And that's really bad. We've got the technology, we can tackle this. We need to be doing it now. That's going to need big investment from government. It's going to need rethinking how we invest up front to save money long term. And again, that's a point that Harriet was making. So not easy challenges, but that has to happen. And because we've got the technologies, it's something we can do really quickly. I'd like to focus as well on businesses, because energy support for businesses is really important, both to help them save money on their energy costs, to make their premises more pleasant, warmer, drier, better lit, all of those things, and to help those businesses actually survive. And there are projects, we're running one, there are others around, to provide energy efficiency support to businesses. And I really want to promote that as one of the things we need to be doing. Ours is European funded, so it'll run out in a couple more years. What's the government going to do? Are they going to provide the money? Again, up front, you can loan money to businesses and they pay it back through the savings. We need to make all of that happen. We need to make it happen now. Transport, picking up Harriet's point, yes, switching to EVs doesn't solve, electric vehicles, sorry, jargon, doesn't solve everything, but it helps. And there's going to be a massive program of installing infrastructure. We're going to need charge points everywhere. And once they're in, people are going to back their cars into them. They're going to stop working. The connections are going to go wrong. They're going to get rained on. So there's going to be work long term in maintaining, installing and then maintaining electric vehicle charge points. What about electric buses? That's something I'm really interested in. And solar carports, so that all our car parks are covered in solar panels. Lots and lots and lots of opportunities like that. And interesting to note that Q2 of this year is the first time ever that electric vehicles have actually outsold traditional petrol and diesel vehicles. So that's a really interesting turning point. Greening our places. When we consulted the public, everybody said tree planting was their top priority, and that to tackle climate change. And that's really interesting because it's very, very important for landscape. It's important for absorbing the carbon that we can't reduce. And as with peat absorbs, holds trillions of tons of carbon. And as we chop trees down and burn them, or any other landscape, we're emitting it back into the air. So really key area, very important. Not the greatest immediate opportunity for carbon saving. It's more the final thing we need to do. Really important for mental and physical health. Not a lot of jobs, but often nice quality jobs, but you will never be rich if you work in this area. And finally, I think, because I could talk forever, but I'm going to stop in a second, new technologies. We need research, we need development, we need investment funding that's easily available. For example, there's a network of mines, coal mines, empty disused coal mines underneath County Durham and most of the Northeast and most of the country. They're mostly flooded, the water's warm. We can use it to heat our homes and our businesses, and there are projects like that developing. But you need to invest a fortune up front to drill down for something which will then work for 20 or 30 or 40 years with no additional costs. But the money isn't there up front. We've been trying to do a very simple scheme to use mine water heat in the leisure centre, which was revolutionary when we started. It's taken us 4 years out of the 8-9 years we've got left. We've already spent 4 years and we still haven't managed to make the damn thing work. because we can't get the money, not because it doesn't work, the heat's there, the water's there, we've proved all of that, but we need the money up front, and it's a big risk. So how we actually enable all of that. But if we can make something like that happen, it's a whole new technology, massive potential for jobs across the country, driven from the northeast. I could talk a lot more, but I'm going to stop because I think there are others who've got more interesting things to say.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm sure we could all just sit here and listen to you all night, actually, because it is really, really interesting. And I've certainly learned a lot. And I think it's just whenever you listen to people who I think kind of live and breathe all this stuff, you realise how kind of I guess creative and imaginative you kind of need to be to be tackling this issue, and because it is thinking about reimagining the world and doing things differently. So yeah, just fascinating for me to listen. So thank you so much. And I guess you're kind of touching on some of those, think some of those things like funding, and I guess that, you've kind of touched on how you work with your kind of political colleagues in that sense. So kind of ties in nicely to our next speaker and that kind of more political perspective. So I'll introduce our penultimate speaker, Clare Penny-Evans, who is Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Communities for Newcastle City Council. So Clare, I suppose with your political hat on, what do you think needs to be done to kind of enable us to do that work that's been set out to reach net zero in the northeast and create those jobs? And I don't know if you can touch on kind of what is being done, what are the challenges in kind of like doing the things that you're aware that need to be done?
Thanks, Rona. I'm probably going to touch on some things that are already being mentioned by our speakers, but again, I think we're all sort of coming from this from a very similar viewpoint. So I think it's really good that we've got this togetherness about this. I want to say thank you, Rona, for inviting me to today as well, because actually one of the key aspects I think of this work is bringing people together. And that's why this event's really important, because already we're making contacts. I will get in touch with John, we can learn from each other. And I think that's really important, because I do think if we want to get a really good path towards net zero, we need to adopt a cooperative approach. And I think this is about enabling us to think of new ways of working together, pooling our knowledge, our resources, building on different strengths and expertise, sharing ideas and good examples of good practice, because we need to raise awareness of the issue, we need to inform people of what they can do, and we need to give people the opportunity to make the changes that they want to do. In Newcastle, we've adopted a place-based approach structured around people and their environment. And we've developed a net zero task force. And this has been about working with some of our anchor institutions, like our hospital trust, who was the first hospital trust in the country to declare a climate emergency, working with our universities, working with our colleges and businesses and our trade unions, because we know that we can't do this alone, and no individual or organisation can get us to that net zero target by themselves. We have to work together. We have to enable meaningful dialogue. We have to engage with each other. We have to know what we can do individually, collectively, and what organisations can do to get us to this point. Like what Maggie said, Newcastle declared a climate emergency, and I know that we are not alone, because I've looked and all of our local authorities, our neighbouring local authorities, have also declared a climate emergency, as too have our combined authorities. And I think really that shows how our region is really committed to this and in reducing our carbon usage, and how we are prepared to lead the fight to tackle climate change. It also shows for me that local government can lead the way, because often most of us are actually declaring a climate emergency 20 years before the government is with our net zero target. So that's local government leading the way. And so we need our leadership teams to be engaging with our communities and lobbying government, because we do need investment to make this happen. Investment in renewable energy, decarbonisation, building of homes to a high standard, so we can create those green jobs of the future. We're already hearing that the North is disproportionately affected by the pandemic, suffering 20% reduction in the value of goods and services, and we've got 2 million workers still on furlough. This is all before Brexit, which we know is going to have a massive impact on our region. So we can talk about building back better and tackling climate change, but we have to see this as an opportunity also to level up for the north, to make sure the northern region creates this as an opportunity so that we can create jobs, long-term, high-quality, well-paid green jobs, rather than gig economy, short-based, short-term boom and bust cycle jobs. So we need to be lobbying the government for targeted investment in our region to enable our region to lead the transition to net zero. We need action for the government, as everybody's already said, on funding, on securing new powers as well over public transport, so we can do some of those really imaginative things that we want to do around public transport. We need to be able to make recommendations. So if we see something that we think needs to be changed, we need to be able to influence national policy. And we need to have a national approach to ensuring that climate change is costed into the markets. We need grant funding, like Maggie said, for research and development, so we can look at these new technologies. That's why our net zero, and I'm sure Maggie's as well, action plan isn't static, it's fluid, it's got to constantly move and change because new technologies come on board, and that's when we'll be able to perhaps look at other ways to reducing our carbon. We need support for industry so that we can have develop a supply chain requiring that just transition, so that also we can have reduced manufacturing and installation costs. It would be great if we could have regional low carbon low carbon enterprise zones. If we could have hubs where businesses can be really creative. And we need to be supporting, I think that Liz might talk about in the future, about training and education and those skills for the future. We need wider infrastructure and rollout programs to enable that transition. And we need organisations to be able to access that knowledge to help them to make that change, whether that's getting information and advice from someone like Harriet or the energy advisors that Maggie mentioned, but we need to be able to access those when we need to, so that we can all look at how we can make them changes. There's about 185,000 full-time workers in England at the moment who work in the low carbon renewable energy economy. By 2030, this could be 694,000 and even 1 million by 2050. And for this region, that could be 100,000 new jobs. Jobs in sectors like low carbon electricity, low carbon heat, alternative fuel sources, energy efficiency products, low carbon services, low emission infrastructure, all jobs that will help us to tackle our carbon emissions. So our net zero action plan looks at, again, like I said, I'm relating to that because that's something I know most about. We look at the key themes for us, and there are energy, transport, adaptation and sustainability. And I don't want to go into the depths of it, just like what Maggie said. You know, I'm quite a bit happy for you to share, and I'd like to see Maggie's, and I'm sure she can see our net zero action plan, and we can again learn from each other. But we've got things in there about retrofitting housing. You know, we're looking at the Green Homes Grant, energy efficiency, retrofitting boilers. There's going to be jobs in housing, but also making sure houses are future-proofed, have low carbon heating, have world-class energy efficiency. We will need to have renewable electricity generation, low carbon heat transition, looking at district energy networks, electric vehicles. You know, the list can go on. We are also looking at low traffic neighbourhoods, you know, that whole idea about 15-minute neighbourhoods. So everything that you need to get to is in 15 minutes from your home. So our ambition really is to provide quality, sustainable housing, low carbon economy, which addresses poverty, but it looks to ensure that people feel invested in and included in challenging social inequality, that we recognise the importance of green spaces, because through COVID we know this has had a really massive mental and physical health impact for those people who've had little or no access to wide green spaces during lockdown. So post-COVID, although we're not really post-COVID at the moment, we want to be accelerating our ambitions. And we know that combating challenges of climate change will require an adaptable approach and a just and fair transition. So I think really in order to build back better to recover better, we need to be creating job opportunities, but we also need to supporting and reskilling those workforces who are going to be, those people who are going to be losing their jobs. And we need to also be training young people. There are many challenges to this, which go back to what I said before and some of the asks of government, because after years of austerity, we need funding and we need investment to make these plans happen. We can't allow this region to be neglected again, and we need to collectively, as a region, lobby for this to be something that will help us through this current crisis. And yes, part of the challenge also goes from what I said at the beginning about bringing people along with us. And that's why perhaps we need to be enabling, you know, people are often wary of change, but we've seen through this crisis that people can adapt when the need is there. So we need to be enabling people to see the changes they can make, whether that's having climate champions, pledges people sign up to, or getting people more involved with things like the climate assemblies. And COVID-19's also highlighted as well that there's the risks in ignoring environmental issues. We know that the health of our population, the environment and the economy are all interlinked, and that economic shock of COVID is really a stark warning about the risks that might come later down the line if we don't do anything to mitigate or adapt to this climate change. So for me, it's really about us all working together and leading locally and regionally and pushing for a green recovery to get us through this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I think that's a brilliant demonstration of that local political leadership, isn't it, on climate change? But I think you've articulated really well, basically, the context that brought about this series, which was effectively, we're facing this global health pandemic, we're facing a global climate crisis, we've got jobs at risk, seeing redundancies. How do we kind of tackle all those things together? Because, you know, like Maggie said, and like I thought everyone's kind of touched on, we haven't got the time to do one at a time, have we? And actually some of the ways of tackling you know, the kind of outbreak from COVID is, if it's done the right way, can benefit the climate as well. So yeah, I completely agree with kind of everything you've touched on there. And it kind of nicely brings us on to the final speaker, because you've really talked about there the need for the, you know, how do we do this fairly? How do we make sure people have the right skills for all those jobs that you've been talking about? So our final speaker for the evening will be able to, I'm sure, to give us a slightly different but very important perspective on this conversation. So without further ado, I'll introduce Liz Bromley, who's the Chief Executive of Newcastle College Group. Liz, I'm sure that your mind is full kind of COVID risk assessments and making sure people are safe at work and safe in their education, but you know, with that longer term perspective in mind, particularly about, you know, the kind of type of organisation that Newcastle College Group is in terms of the future kind of young people. I know we've had conversations around this before, but you know, talking about all these jobs and the jobs that are needed for, you know, how our economy will look, and making sure that there's that just transition, which is really vital to our role as a union when it comes to climate change. I'm really interested in your thoughts, I suppose, on what kind of role further education has to play in building and transitioning to that future.
Thank you, Rona, and it's been so interesting to listen to the previous three speakers and think about, you know, the response of education to the scenarios that have been painted. So I thought before I started to answer the question that you've posed, I'd just like to set the context a little bit as an employer and as an educator in the North East, and the impact of COVID-19, which has already been referred to, on us as an FE College Group has been profound, because it's absolutely restated the way we teach, the way we work and the way we travel to conduct our business. An unintended consequence of the pandemic is that the spotlight's been allowed to really shine on the possibilities that are now open to us in relation to the ways we work that would be better for the environment, would be better for the work-life balance, would be a more cost-effective and more thoughtful use of our estate, reflecting the comments that colleagues have made already this evening, but also really helping us shift our focus onto more flexible and versatile ways in which we engage with our colleagues, our external networks, our industry partners, with our city councils, with our local authorities. It's really reframed the conversation. And while these changes, I do appreciate, can be having a disastrous effect on city centre life, on the coffee shops and the sandwich bars, they're also without doubt starting to have a positive impact on our understanding of what is possible when there is actually little or no choice in the matter about how we live, work and travel. So in relation to reducing our carbon footprint and giving our environment the opportunity to recover and sustain itself, we as a college group have travelled more miles and faster than we ever could have done pre-pandemic. We've saved thousands of road miles, thousands of rail miles, a great deal of energy usage in what are empty or half empty buildings. And that's just NCG, one college group. But another piece of evidence that we're aware of, the changes that have been brought about, the unintended consequence of COVID-19 on the waste disposal industry. You know, another business that's taken a hit because there's so much less waste about. You know, with hospitality and the high street retail industries being reined back, the amount of waste that we're generating is decreasing significantly. So living, working and disposing of things differently is creating an opportunity to review the old normal and bring a new, greener normal into reality. And conversely, the businesses that are providing digital media services, digital advertising, digital platforms to support these new ways of working are seeing surges in their business. So it's not all doom and gloom. They can work from home. They're teaching us how to build businesses from afar and demonstrating how the fourth industrial revolution has landed with the vengeance of a pandemic. So to get to the question, what can FE do to contribute to averting the climate emergency? So we're living, working, teaching and learning differently. We're engaging with each other differently. And we have a really heightened awareness of what we've taken for granted as a slow green evolution into being on a fast trajectory to change. The way we work and the jobs that people will have in this post-pandemic, probably recessionary world will also be different. And the role of FE has always been to bridge the gap between what industry needs, what our city councils or local authorities needs, and what skills the workforce must have. Gavin Williamson recently referred to FE as the forgotten education. I would like to think of it as the future education as we start to make the bridge between what we know and what we need to know. So we need to position ourselves to deliver the higher technical skills alongside functional skills to work confidently in a digital workplace, and we're ideally situated to tackle the skills gap in relation to those green skills or the green collar jobs that are located in our communities and that all colleagues here tonight have referred to already. So we need to be able to work with the green agenda, with our employers to stimulate a movement towards green jobs. For us to thrive as a sector supporting our communities, we must adapt and lead on new skills delivery, but we have to do that with industry. It's our job to prepare and educate learners of all ages and capabilities to understand the latest technologies, standards and skills that employers need to enable them to fulfil satisfying roles at every level. Because of the way the sector is built, we're really well placed with the infrastructure, facilities and the willingness to move from where we have been to where we need to be and to deliver such skills programmes and qualifications with confidence and speed. We need to work closely with the industries that are developing their business plans to operate in a greener and more environmentally conscious way. We have to co-create a future curriculum to give learners the skills that employers will need in this new context. And in doing this, we in further education can help lead the way for the creation of those new jobs that have been referred to this evening and for the recovery of existing green jobs in a post-pandemic world. So we're gearing up to deliver a new curriculum. It's already been referenced by Harriet, and I'm going to give you some examples that will, I'm afraid, sound familiar. Transport industry, Further education must now move away from traditional automotive related training and embrace electric vehicle manufacture and servicing and maintenance skills. And Maggie has referenced the infrastructure that's needed to make that electric vehicle industry sound and sustainable. We need to be able to improve and expand an industry that makes us less reliant on our own cars, more confident to use the public transport system, and to walk and cycle in safety. And I'm afraid to say, after the pandemic pounds that many of us have put on, walking and cycling will make their own contribution to the public health agenda as well. But in terms of civils and logistics, FE stands ready and able to teach the skills that will take these traditional industries forward into a world in which our carbon footprint must become lighter and our emissions fewer, to ensure our sustainability at every point in society. And we need to lead the workforce in understanding what a zero carbon future will look like. Moving on to energy, we have to create a workforce that can decarbonise the electric grid, to create, install and maintain the wind turbines that we see with increasing regularity across the countryside and offshore. We need to create skilled technicians who can promote the development and installation of solar panels as a new source of household and business energy and battery storage. And when I question what that meant, this is when you have a large battery kept in the garage or in a parking lot that stores excess energy and releases it when a building needs it. So it provides cheaper energy as well as better security for energy. And of course, NCG in Newcastle is fortunate to have our own Energy Academy with the most amazing immersive learning opportunities, enabling students to simulate the experience of being atop a wind turbine fixing a leaky pipe. What a joy that is. The Academy offers fantastic learning opportunities for offshore work by partnership working with the Port of Blyth. And as a college group, we're now joining the dots between the Northeast and the Northwest by linking the curriculum that's offered at the Port of Blyth with what we can now do with the Peel ports in the Northwest. Working together, we will truly be able to further sustainability. FE, as you well know, teaches construction and engineering, again, previously referenced industries. They're the mainstays of our traditional curriculum offer. But we need to now shift our curriculum focus to new methods of construction, how to retrofit buildings, as Maggie, I think, has referred to already, and I think as Clare has also, to become more efficient, sustainable housing options and materials with better insulation, less heat wastage, less use of concrete, and more innovative ways of creating neighbourhoods and communities that maximise the positive impact that they're having on their environment through their buildings, their lifestyle, their recycling and their waste disposal options. And to do this well and to be ahead of the curve, we in the FE sector have to work with builders, constructors, town planners, local authorities to ensure that what we're teaching our learners makes them fit for future demand. If I move to think of our land-based colleges, we need curriculum that focuses on sustainable farming, on forestry and land management, on animal husbandry and food production that supports the environment and sustains the UK in a post-Brexit world. A sector that looks at nature conservation as environmental conservation too. These are all skills that we need to change the net effect of carbon emissions. And we need to be able to compensate for the inevitable loss of city-based jobs following the wake of a COVID-19 world, bringing that double benefit to our environment and our workforce. And finally, we need to stretch and evolve curriculum so that it reflects the technological solutions that are going to be needed to satisfy the younger generations who are very mindful of their own futures, sustainability, protection of the environment, and indeed the planet. I rather think that Greta Thunberg is just around the age of joining an FE college before she goes on to university. But to go on that journey, to go far and to go fast, we have to work in partnership with industry and with our local authorities to evolve new ways of working on these new challenges and new jobs. FE can do these things because at the heart of a thriving community, or Clare's 15-minute community, you should find a thriving college. At the heart of a thriving environment, you should find FE leading the way, doing the things we teach, to make a difference to our world. So that all sounds really nice and easy. No, I don't think so. I think we have some challenges. You can lead a nice environmentally friendly horse to a fine green pool, but you can't always make it drink. So the challenges that we face include, and are probably not exclusive, but we have a lot of our learners for whom the traditional methods of construction, engineering, travel and so on are what they expect, because that's what their family has done, that's what their dads and uncles have done, that's what their family and friends have done. And so we need to work on those families and friendship groups to show that we can shift to the mindset of a greener approach. And as well as delivering new skills, we have to win the hearts and minds of our learners to move away from traditional courses, preparing them to be plumbers and electricians in the old way, and to have the confidence to undertake training for a greener, more sustainable future. And to deliver that cutting edge, exciting and stimulating learning, we have to be fully engaged with employers to make sure that what we teach is relevant and is keeping pace, for example, with the changes in technology, just one of the examples of an industry with which you're always out of date. So we have to work with our local employers to make sure that our courses and our students on them are aligned with local and even national workforce planning, so that we can ensure that the skills development we contribute to is neither over nor undersubscribed to. Now, Claire has mentioned this already, but it would be a glaring omission to skip over the challenge of a government that is not always clear in its direction or goals. It's a tricky one, but we need to be driving national policy that drives forward the skills and industry direction that will support this environmental agenda. And no doubt that kind of clarity and drive would enable us to have funding that would follow. Maybe a public service broadcasting campaign highlighting the potential of the green economy and encouraging our students, our young people and our retrainers to think of new careers, green jobs and new possible futures. National and local investment in the areas that will help us move to a greener future, underpinned by skills, attitudes, behaviour and profitable industries, will be absolutely vital. Net Zero North, as has been referenced, is looking to work collaboratively across the North in terms of higher education, further education and the business sector to create new jobs, to develop research and innovation to support a 20% carbon emissions reduction by 2030, but also alternative forms of energy and that heightened awareness of these critical issues through student training across our communities. The partnership has much potential to bring about real change from research to skills training, and it needs funding. There will be plenty of funding available for such activity, but these things are so competitive and bids have to be really strong with clear targets that can be delivered. We have to work together to be shovel ready with our projects and clear with our intentions, and that's another challenge. So in summary, we are at a point in time when FE, I believe, can stand up and be part of the solution that the country will face post-pandemic in terms of reskilling and creating new jobs, as well as furthering the green economy and the advantages that this will bring to our societies, our businesses and our future. We can be part of the collectives to access funding that will create these new jobs and define these new skills better. And we can transform what has been done in the past in order to do better in the future. Further education is part of that learning organisation infrastructure with an attitude and keenness to learn and teach the things that matter to communities and to industries that underpin our curriculum. We are ready to collaborate, to listen, to learn and to respond to the skills gap with the firm intention of contributing to a greener, cleaner environment with a workforce that is looking forward to and is confident of its future. Claire talked about a cooperative approach. I would suggest that working alone, we can all go fast, but working together, we can go far. And I would like to help make that difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, everybody's clapping, Liz, on the so no, thank you so much, Liz. That's really, really brilliant. It's a positive kind of contribution around the role of FE, and yeah, I guess, you know, you touched on kind of one of the kind of key conversations we were having in the last episode, if you like, of this kind of series was around, you know, COVID, what are the lessons we can learn, what can we take, clearly there's, you know, goes without saying, there's a huge amount of negative consequences of COVID. But one of the things you touched on was that, I suppose, when there is, whether it's political will or any other driver, that, you know, we can change how we act, when we kind of collectively feel that urgency, or when you know, in the context of what Claire was saying, when there's that political will to do something, you know, money can become available, etc. So yeah, and I think the thing that's come out really clearly as well, hasn't it, is partnership working, and how you know, I suppose one of the reasons for doing this as well is, you know, when we talk to employers, when we talk to kind of any of our kind of partner organisations, there's so much work being done behind the scenes on climate change that you kind of never get to hear about, and I guess it's just to kind of have that conversation and encourage whatever organisation to have that conversation in a public way, and see if we can kind of help to do that, because it's really nice to hear about kind of all of that kind of thoughtfulness that's been going on, I suppose partly behind the scenes, and partly probably, you know, with a lot of conversations with your kind of teams. So we have got a few questions. We've got one to start with, if that's all right, for Harriet, which is around, but obviously chip in anybody who wants to speak on this question, but specifically it's one for Harriet around, it's disappeared now, hang on, give me a moment. No, it's gone. I'll move to another one. So one around, this could be, I suppose, potentially Maggie or Claire. I don't know who maybe would feel, you know, want to address this one, but it's how can building change be driven locally if planning regulations are weakened by the effect of national policy changes? And can developers be relied on to do the right thing without regulatory requirements? So really specific, and I know planning's kind of a whole kind of niche area, and there's, you know, there's probably a lot that can be said on that, but I suppose more generally on planning, yeah, what's that interplay between national and local? I don't know, Claire or Maggie, if you feel able to comment on that.
I think, I don't know if it, I'm not sure if it is this, because obviously I'm not sure what the question totally is, but it might be around these new planning regulations that they're bringing in. And really, one of the worries about that is the lack of public engagement and the lack of say that local residents will have on these. So in you know, decisions will be made at a different level, and when it comes to it, you know, so say that as a local area doesn't want something built at the moment, they can lobby, they can get in touch, they can attend, they can put objections in around that, planning committees, local planning committees, but there's a whole government thing around changing that at the moment. But I did see today that actually there's quite a lot of Tory councillors who are really up in arms about this. So hopefully it will get changed before it gets to that final reading. But I don't know if Maggie wants to say a bit more on the actual logistics of it, because I don't do much planning as such, but I just know there is a political element at the moment about this bill that they're trying to bring in.
Yeah, so trying to work the technology. Yeah, I mean, I agree, Claire. I think it's a big part of it is just, it's creating a planning free-for-all potentially, which would be a disaster, because the other part of the question I think was, will the developers, will they build zero carbon homes? And the answer is no, not unless they're forced to. I know that's not fair on all developers. There are some who are building very good, very low carbon homes, but they're in the minority. The majority of the boxes that we see, they'll get around every planning and building regulation that they possibly can, because they're building them cheap and cheerful. We have argued for a long time that we need a public pressure. What the developers say to us is, well, people won't pay extra for these features, like putting solar panels on, for example, or making them more energy efficient. So we can't do it because people won't buy them. What we need is people to be saying, I want to see this in my new house. And there's a whole piece of work I think we need to do probably across the Northeast to try and enforce better standards, because certainly if we wait for this government to do it, I'm sorry to be political, but they ain't going to.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got the question for Harriet now. So it's particularly around what you think, Harriet, if you've got a view on the new green homes vouchers and whether you think they will make much practical difference to homes in the North East. And obviously, if anyone does want to come in after Harriet, that's fine.
I think probably Maggie's probably best to discuss this with me, but I mean, I think in a sense, you've got to think that any scheme that's trying to go in the right direction has to be welcome, because there's usually something in it that you can get out of it, right? But on the other hand, and I mean, this does relate to a point that I might have made about the planning question, which is that the planning of new housing is part of our problem with climate change, but it's really a small part compared to actually how do we deal with the housing that we've got already. And successive governments have tried all sorts of different schemes which use financial incentives to get this done, and very rarely do they work. And the schemes that did used to work was when it was a requirement of the energy utilities to make housing more efficient. And that it was, if you like, you didn't sort of separate the energy system over here and the housing system over there, but actually you said a warm home is a coupling of both things. And so therefore it's actually, if we think about housing as part of our energy system and actually make it a responsibility of those who are providing energy to us to make sure that they're reducing the demand for the market that they're creating, that's really the only time that energy efficiency programs have worked in the UK. So you know, I'm not trying to knock the whole idea of providing some financial incentives. I think they could work for some people, but it's not going to be a substitute for having a kind of systematic responsibility for increasing the energy efficiency of the housing stock, lying with a set of actors who sell us our energy every day.
Okay, Maggie or Claire, did either of you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to agree with Harriet on all that she said. We had a really excellent functioning system that came down from government in years past. There were various different formats, but as you say, through the energy company obligation, people got grants and free and cheap support to make their houses more energy efficient. That was all taken apart, and the rates of what we call retrofitting of houses has dropped dramatically. And now, of course, government are having to try and put something back in place because it's all broken. It's an absolute no-brainer. Until all our houses, the houses we live in, are energy efficient, we're not going to solve the problem. So, and like I said before, we've got the technology, so we really, really do need this one happening, and it has to come from government. And I agree, through the energy companies who were very happy to do it. They were very good at it. Sorry, I get very frustrated.
Okay, any more on that one? Thank you both.
Well, I would just add that I think, you know, just to add to what Maggie was saying, I don't think this is actually a lack of interest on the part of energy companies. I think particularly energy distribution companies are quite interested in becoming more kind of regionally and locally rooted and thinking about what's their role to play in the low carbon transition, and would be interested in being able to become more like energy service companies, so that they're not selling you this much electricity or this much gas every month, but are instead selling you the service of a warm home or clean clothes, right? And they're quite interested in developing that. And that links to some of the stuff that Liz was saying earlier about how do we kind of upskill in these, you know, big industries, creating skills and capacities to do things in a different way, right? So rather than just being a boiler fitter, this is somebody who can, you know, skilling people up so that they can actually do, you know, make an assessment of what all of the different things might be that you need to do to improve your home, to provide you with the service that you want. And I really do think there's an appetite within the energy companies that could be enabled through the right kind of level playing field and the right kind of regulation, but they're not going to do it individually, not knowing what their other competitors are going to do.
And Rona, I think, was the question asking whether or not it was worthwhile to go for it? Because I think if anybody was going to, I think we've all agreed that it's really sensible to actually insulate your home. And if you can get a grant to do that, then I think we all would agree to go for it. And if somebody did want to apply, and we would really encourage that. I know in Newcastle we've had the heat pumps that we've managed to get through with available for people, and we've had a huge demand, and we're really impressed for how much people want to look at doing something different with their homes. So if people are really interested in insulating their homes and they can get the grant, then I would encourage them to go for it. I think what we're all saying is that perhaps there could be a better way to do that in the future, but definitely to go for it.
Okay, brilliant. There is one, I'm going to just finish on 2 questions, if that's all right. So one's very specific, and then one's a bit broader. So penultimate question. So I'm not sure who kind of fills up for taking this one, but it's, if more diverse large-scale tree planting takes place, species-wise, rather than monocultures, will that create more maintenance jobs as well as more complete and balanced environment? So it's kind of looking at the jobs perspective of that large-scale tree planting, and it's effectively, does anyone kind of feel able to comment on whether that would create more jobs? Harriet, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I can have a go at that. I mean, I think the key thing here is tree planting is really important, and I think diversity and woodland management, and some of the stuff that Liz was saying earlier on about integrating agroforestry with land use change, so that you're no longer sort of separating farmland from forestry, but thinking about ways in which they can be integrated. I think that's where quite a lot of high skilled jobs will be, because it is, you know, all these things are sort of monitored. A lot of it's digital. I mean, you know, it's quite, you know, some of it can be quite high tech. It needs quite a lot of different skills to kind of manage. And I think there are potentially quite high skilled, important jobs in kind of the development of agroforestry across our landscape. When you come into a city context, planting trees is obviously really important. We all love them, but there's a lot of also high skilled jobs to be had in thinking about designing, innovation and design around green walls, green roofs, stormwater management through cities with these kinds of approaches of working with nature as well. So there are low skilled jobs in this area, of course, but there are also the opportunities for high skilled jobs, and it's sort of getting a whole sort of, for want of a better word, a whole ecology of jobs around nature-based solutions that we need. Just like in any sector, from the low skill to the high skill, and we need to create a sort of a whole set of different kinds of jobs in the sector. I'm sure Liz has got more to say.
Well, yes, I'm absolutely in agreement with what you're saying, Harriet. But I think there's something about a cultural reformation as well, because as we all start to work differently, there's no reason whatsoever to think that the shift onto a more environmentally friendly land-based set of career options should be a natural follower. And one of the concerns that I have around the move to distance learning is that when you get new people, young people who haven't worked before, older people who are reskilling, coming in to a remote working infrastructure, they have nobody to model themselves on. They have nobody to watch or behaviours to learn. So actually, we're redefining what a career might look and feel like, and bringing that whole natural conservation, land-based replanting, whatever it might be, in as a whole swathe of new career options. As long as we've got the education and the training supporting it, the funding that will enable those industries to get going, because this is part of what we want our social and political infrastructure to support, then I think it's absolutely reasonable to have the expectation that jobs, careers and cultural value will be placed on that kind of work.
Okay, brilliant. So I guess a parting thought from each of you on something that came up fairly early on. I think, Harriet, you mentioned, and I'll not claim to quote you because I'll get it wrong, but you talked about how, I suppose, the contribution to carbon emissions is directly related to income, and that, you know, the responsibility is distributed unequally, and those with responsibility must act. And I'd be interested to kind of hear from each of you just a parting thought from your different perspectives on how we achieve that. Shall I take it? I'll take it in turn as you spoke. So Harriet.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I know that that's a lot easier to say than it is to act on, but there was a recent report which showed us that 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from 1% of the population, and I think we have to take that seriously. I think that's part, it comes from the fact that those people with higher incomes tend to have larger houses, have more staff, use more energy, and travel more. And that's sort of as simple as it is in a way. And so on an individual basis, it's about reducing your overall consumption footprint, really, and thinking about what your responsibilities are there. But on a broader scale, I do think it is incumbent on large industries and large institutions to think about what their role is. And I'm really encouraged by the number of industries who now are declaring a net zero target. And when Liz was talking, I was thinking that as well as sort of greening up whole sectors of the economy, there's a real need for jobs that are about being green in other sectors of the economy, right? So someone like H&M in Sweden, they have like 300 people working in their laboratory, like in their lab, creating new ideas about how the whole company can become green. And I think that's a really important, we want to see all of our industries and all of our companies in the Northeast really adopt that and sort of bring green inside. I think that would be another way for them to take more responsibility.
Okay, Maggie, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Harriet said, and it can be very difficult when you look at this on a global level and you look at your Donald Trumps and Bolsonaro in Brazil, and you just think, what is the point when you've got evil people like that? I'm sorry, but they are evil, destroying the planet. But we have to do what we can. For local authorities, leadership is really important. It's not easy, but it's really, really important. And yeah, that whole thing about the richer you are, the more carbon you spend. We've got a great load of people when you look at Greta Thunberg and her followers and Extinction Rebellion, some of them at least, and the campaigners. We've got some wonderful campaign groups around. And the people there want to do everything they can, and they'll put a huge amount of effort into quite small projects often. But it shows how much it means to them. I think one of the most important things that we can all do is become intelligent consumers, so that when we are shopping and buying things, we're thinking about the environment. And it was interesting, I think, Liz, it was you saying how much less packaging there is around. Sorry if it wasn't you, but anyway, was it Clare? Yeah, and how much less packaging for food to take away the eating out economy. But my daughter here with the baby and a new flat is buying stuff online, and the boxes that are arriving, unbelievable, massive amounts of cardboard being delivered here. So I would love to see pressure put on by individual consumers saying, I'm not willing to buy this, and going, not just saying, I won't buy it, but going to the company and saying, I'm not happy, I won't buy this until you make it more green. We know that companies do respond to that. It's very, very important. So I think we shouldn't underestimate our own individual power in that sense.
Thank you, Maggie. And Claire?
Yeah, and some of this is, as well, for me, is about tackling things as well that can come as a side product of tackling our carbon emissions. So whether that's, well, looking at fuel poverty and how we can support our residents who are in fuel poverty, accessing that in a different way, and the way we can insulate their homes, the way we can look at perhaps the battery storage or the heat pump sourcing and district energy systems in places, so that we can look at what we can do, but also as well what we can do, like I said before, on much more of a cooperative approach as well. So looking at sustainability and around food, looking at food poverty as well. So for me, it's about how we can use tackling climate change as well to tackle some of the bigger issues around inequality and the public health and the inequalities we've had in public health. So that access to green space, that access to keeping fit and getting fitter on bikes, and how we do that. So for me, I think it's about how we can have a two-pronged approach where we can help with these inequalities such as food poverty and fuel poverty, but we can do that by reducing our carbon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. And final word to Liz. Please.
Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think it's all underpinned by education. You know, the more we educate, the more we communicate, the more we reinforce the messages that colleagues around the table have so clearly laid out today, then the more hope that we have. Thinking specifically about people who've got more money to spend, you know, if we think about the travel and tourism industry and repurpose that into what a fantastic country the UK is, you know, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, England, fantastic landscape, scenery, coasts, you know, wildlife. Let's think about repurposing the education around travel and tourism to make this economy greener and successful in a post-Brexit world. And just think about how we educate people to think differently, to spend their money differently, and to behave differently. So I would end with collaboration and education. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think anyone's going to disagree. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone. I think it's been really, really thought-provoking. And I'm sure people, you know, have appreciated will go away and think and act on that. So thank you all for your time. And yeah, I hope you got something out of it too. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye-bye.